We are in the order of business of motions, petitions, communications. Senator from Scott, for the purpose of communicating and motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. As we begin this first day of this extraordinary session, colloquially called a special session, but in the Constitution it's an extraordinary session, I think it's important to review the events of the last 18 months that have brought us here in a rare September session. 18 months ago, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic started. We were at the end of the 2020 session with limited numbers of days left. We pivoted and called many audibles and tried to react to a virus, the path of which we did not know. We did give the governor some extra abilities during that pandemic, during that state of emergency. And then we adjourned, sine die, as prescribed by the Constitution. And I think all of us in the beginning, Republican and Democrat, thought that the governor's initial actions to get to 15 days to flatten the curve were appropriate. But then as spring turned into summer and summer turned into fall, many of us, including a large portion of Kentuckians, were not entirely pleased with the governor's unilateral actions, and people were also disappointed to learn that the General Assembly could do nothing about it when we're not in session. And of course, we have placed the constitutional amendment on the ballot next year where the people can decide if it wants to give the General Assembly more flexibility in calling itself into special session to deal with emergencies. Many of us felt that the governor's unilateral decisions were made in a non-collaborative fashion with the people's branch of government, and that businesses and our liberties were arbitrarily impacted. So let me go back to the Constitution and just read a little bit about the enumerated powers, essentially the job description of the governor. The supreme executive power of the Commonwealth shall be vested in a chief magistrate. That's actually the title officially in the Constitution, but it says here, who shall be styled, quote, governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, unquote. And that was ratified in 1891 and revised a month later. The governor shall be the commander-in-chief of the Army and the Navy of this Commonwealth. Now, I don't know of any Navy, although recently at a recent lunch with a friend, I did see a Kentucky State University houseboat floating down the Kentucky River, and maybe that would qualify. But also the governor is given the right to call into service the militia, but he shall not command it in the field unless advised to do so by a resolution of the General Assembly. Who knew that we had the ability to tell our governor that he or she needs to lead us into battle? The governor has the power to fill vacancies, not legislative vacancies, but other vacancies like judicial, for example. The governor can remit fines and forfeitures and grant reprieves and pardons. We all know that the vast power of pardoning is vested with the governor. The governor may require information from state officers, give reports and recommendations to the General Assembly from time to time, and of course, as we learned here today, call the General Assembly into a special session. It's a very narrow job description that the founding fathers of this Commonwealth gave to the governor. Now, the governor, to be fair, felt he was acting within powers given to him in 1998 by the General Assembly, when it expanded the powers of a governor during a state of emergency. However, I don't think they ever envisioned a once every 100 years, we hope, pandemic. It was for things like tornadoes, and ice storms, and floods, and droughts. We have a flood recovery effort in Nicholas County, and indeed we are going to act to extend that state of emergency. So fast forward to this year's General Assembly session, we passed House Bill 1, Senate Bill 1, Senate Bill 2, and House Joint Resolution 77 to place limits on a governor's power during a state of emergency. The governor vetoed those bills. We overrode them overwhelmingly. By the way, this was after an election last fall when the majority party in both chambers reached a high water mark in the number of seats after most of the year dealing with the pandemic and criticisms leveled at the governor. So after we overrode the vetoes, the governor sued and got a stay by the Franklin Circuit Court, which led to further court action. So let me start by reading from the November 2020 Acri versus Bashir decision. While the authority exercised by the governor in accordance with KRS Chapter 39A is necessarily broad, that was the 1998 General Assembly. The checks on that authority are the same as those identified in Chief Justice McCormick's dissenting opinion, and that is judicial challenges to the existence of an emergency or to the content of a particular order or regulation, legislative amendment or revocation of the emergency powers granted the governor, and finally, the ultimate check of the citizens holding the governor accountable at the ballot box. That sort of got things underway in trying to make it that the laws of the legislature are in fact legal. So then we fast forward to just a few weeks ago. In the United States District Court, Eastern District of Kentucky, Judge William Bertelsmann, appointed many, many years ago by that known conservative champion of liberty, President Jimmy Carter. And of course, I'm being facetious, because we all know Jimmy Carter didn't appoint liberal judges, or conservative judges. He appointed liberal judges, as a Democrat president would do, as is their wont after an election. So let me read to you from Judge Bertelsmann's decision. Plaintiffs have shown a likelihood of success on the merits of their claim that the governor's unilateral issuance of Executive Order 2021-585 without the prior approval of the General Assembly violates KRS 39A. The governor's unilateral issuance of the executive order without the prior approval of the General Assembly violated the law. Judge Bertelsmann continues, the executive branch cannot simply ignore laws passed by the duly elected representatives of the citizens of the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Therein lies tyranny. Not my words, Mr. President. These are the words of a Jimmy Carter-appointed federal judge. Therein lies tyranny. If the citizens dislike the laws passed, the remedy lies with them at the polls. Federal Judge Bertelsmann. The next day or two, the Supreme Court of Kentucky confirmed what the General Assembly always felt, that the laws passed by the people's elected branch of government are indeed the law. And I quote from that Supreme Court 7-0 decision. The emergency did not create power. It merely marked an occasion when power should be exercised. In fact, in Brown, we held that, quote, to the extent that the governor has any implied or inherent powers in addition to those the Constitution expressly gives him, it seems clear that such unexpressed executive power is subservient to the overriding authority of the legislature. And I continue, considering that the General Assembly is the policy-making body of the Commonwealth, not the governor or the courts, equitable considerations support enforcing a legislative body's policy choices. In fact, non-enforcement of a duly enacted statute constitutes irreparable harm to the public and the government. Pretty strong words. And they continued, practically speaking, except for those conferred upon him specifically by the Constitution, which I read from earlier, the governor's powers, like those of the executive officers created in Section 91, are only what the General Assembly chooses to give him. Thus, the governor has no implied or inherent emergency powers beyond that given him by the legislature, who as elected officials serve at the behest of the Commonwealth. And finally, the governor has alleged irreparable injury to his constitutional powers, but as discussed, These findings are largely unsupported by sound legal principles because they are occasioned by erroneous interpretations of the constitutional authority of the governor. Erroneous interpretations of the constitutional authority of the governor. As a result, we find that the trial court's issuance of injunctive relief was improper. That, of course, is Judge Philip Shepard of the Franklin Circuit Court. Pretty strong words in a series of court cases that affirmed the right of the people's branch of government, the legislature, to make laws that are indeed legal. And that brings us to today. Now, to give him credit, as soon as the court case was filed 2 weeks ago, this past Saturday, the governor did reach out to House and Senate leadership, and we have been working with him and his administration during the last 2 weeks to bring forward the bills that we will consider in this extraordinary session. And so, Mr. President, with that summary of the last 18 months, to the best of my ability, I would like to move now from communications to motions to get the process moving with the bills that we have filed today to deal with the Supreme Court decision and the governor's actions of the last 18 months.